Thank you everyone for joining me today. We're very lucky to have Gary Mishuris of Silver Ring Value Partners. I've gone through a lot of Gary's ways of thinking about investing. And I know people tend to concentrate a lot on fees when they're looking at fund managers, but one thing I think you should really concentrate on is aligning interests. So Gary, when people are evaluating funds, what should they look for in terms of alignment of interests?
Sure. So I would say there are three things you want to kind of think about. And the three things are, one, can the manager build a lot of wealth for himself or herself while the investor, the client, has a mediocre or worse outcome? So that's number one. No, and and I'll zoom in into each kind of item. Number two is basically what behavior does the structure and the fee structure incent for the manager? What is the fee structure? What does it make them want to do? In terms of financial incentives. And number three is to the degree to which they rely on quote unquote industry standard as a justification for their structure, as opposed to thinking from first principles and figuring out what's fair and what aligns incentives. So let me go through briefly each one. In terms of building wealth, the standard fee structures, there's two, right? There's the flat, call it 1%, and then there's the hedge fund structure of 2 and 20 or 1 and 20, right? In each case, you can have a very mediocre result. Let's say the investor does no better than the passive index fund, but the manager builds massive wealth, right? In the case of a hedge fund, it could be very quick, but even in the case of this flat 1% fee, which some people are very proud of, I'm a fee-only advisor, great, but you can still have not very good returns, be very wealthy yourself from running your business, and not have your investors really do well. Number two is, what is your fee structure kind of incent? Well, let's think about it. If you have just a flat 1% fee as an example, it incents one thing, asset gathering. And no matter how you spin it, the more assets you have, the more you will make money. And that asset gathering is going to pay you more than having higher returns. That's the financial incentive. It's not that you necessarily will do that, but that's what it's pushing you to do. Now, for a hedge fund, perhaps the 1 and 20, or 2 and 20 also incents asset gathering, but in some way it perhaps incents risk taking above and beyond what's appropriate, because if a hedge fund has one huge year, they conduct a massive fee, and it's that short-term time horizon that they're incented to focus on, which is, in my view, as a long-term value investor, suboptimal. And finally, the third point is, when I was launching Silver Ring Value Partners about 5 years ago, I heard a lot about industry standard. So industry standard is an adult way of saying the other kids are doing it, so I'm going to do it too. And it usually refers to things that are advantageous to the manager and disadvantageous to the client. For instance, the standard practice in the hedge fund space is when you charge a management fee, to then charge hidden, not really hidden, but kind of partially hidden expenses to the fund directly for things like audit and fund administration, a bunch of things which do add up, especially for a moderate-sized fund. And that's the logic, is it's industry standard. Now, it makes no sense. You're already charging a management fee. Why should you then charge on top of that? It's just a way to charge more. So when you see people acting in a way that favors them at the expense of the client and using industry standard as a justification, that suggests that the person just wants to make a lot of money for themselves, not necessarily for the client. So those are the three things I would focus on.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was very useful. And I've really learned a lot from you and your owner's manual. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.